Alright guys, last weekend I was out on my pedal boat and I've decided before I go back out on it again I'm going to change the pedal ratio. Now at the moment, for every 1 revolution on the pedals I'm getting about 9 revolutions on the prop. And what that feels like is when you're on a push bike and you're stuck in first gear all the time, it's just a bit too easy to pedal. So I've got myself some new sprockets. I'm going to fit them and hopefully next time I go out it should be a lot nicer to pedal. I'm hoping that by adding these I don't put too much torque into the system, but I won't know that till I'm back on the water. So let's get making. The first thing I have to do is to split the chain and take out the pedal crankshaft. The next thing I have to do is to cut the crank, but I can't just cut it in the middle because the place where I cut it determines where this sits. I'll explain that later, but at the moment this sprocket lines up with the sprocket that's fitted already on the boat. When I move this one forward to the spindle, it's still got to line up with the one on the front of the boat. And this one, which will be next to it, has to be as close as possible. And this one has to line up with this one. So I have to cut the crank so that this fits as close to this position, allowing for this piece of metal. You'll see why in a few minutes. So now I know where it has to get cut, it's easier to do it in the vise. Now that these holes are lined up, we can line the centre hole with the hole on the sprocket and drill through. Now that I've finished making these plates, I've bolted them onto the sprocket just to make sure they line up, and they're all perfectly lined up, so I'm happy with that. Next thing I have to do is to take them off and weld one onto the end of this part of the crank and the other one onto this part of the crank, making sure that they line up with these bars. And that way, when I put it all back together, everything will be lined up just like it was before. And the last thing I have to do is weld this sprocket onto this sprocket. And then, hopefully, I'll be able to make a little support and fit everything back in the boat. Let's get welding. Wow, that's not bad for me. The plates have been welded onto the crank, the sprockets have been welded, and now I've got to fit this sprocket in between the plates, and then I can tighten everything up. And this time I'm going to be using lock nuts instead of loose nuts, because obviously I don't want them coming undone. So let's get that done. I've got the sprocket mounted onto the crank, and I've also got the front sprockets mounted onto the spindle. So the next thing I have to do is to make a support bracket for this to mount inside the boat. But I can't do that today because I've run out of time. So for me it's going to be tomorrow. For you guys, just hang on a minute and I'll be right back with you. Well, while everything's on the bench, I thought I'd try and give you an idea of what I've got to do to get this back in the boat. So this is the crankshaft. When I fit this back in the boat, that determines where this sprocket sits. And this nut represents the sprocket that's fitted already in the boat, so that can't change. And what I've got to do is temporarily fit this, attach both chains, and then I've got to move these pieces until both chains are under tension. And when they are, I'll clamp these two pieces of wood to the frame that's already inside the boat. And I'll mark them with pencil, then I'll take everything back out, and once it's out, I'll trim the pieces of wood so that when I put them back in, they'll fit perfectly into the frame. Well, sounds simple. It's a big job, that. I'm not looking forward to it. But hey, I've got to do it, so let's get it done. The last thing I said was, this is probably going to be difficult. And it was. That was over a week ago. But now, I've got it working. I've had it in the boat, I've been pedaling it, the propeller is spinning more than double what it used to do. So everything works. And the only reason I've taken it back out was so that I could trim all these pieces of wood to the final shape. And what I've got to do next is to put these pieces back in and bolt them all together. Let me show you what I've made. Well, there it is. It doesn't look much, but it's kept me busy for over a week. It's basically two bits of wood with holes drilled for the spindle, and the holes have been recessed for these sack trolley bearings. Sack trolley bearing has a little lip to stop it going into the wood when you tighten it up, and also to stop the two pieces crushing together, I've had to put a spacer tube over the top of the spindle which sits on the back of the bearing. Now I've had to put another one in this side. You don't really see that, no, it's a bit dark, but there's another one on this side, and I've had to fit that to stop the sprocket and chain touching the wood. And the reason that it's so close is because that is the position it needs to be in to line up with the front sprocket, and the wood has to be in that position because that's where the frame inside the boat means I have to put it. No choice. So there it is. Now all I have to do is get it back in the boat. Let's get on with it. Well, there we go guys, it's all finished and it all works fantastic. Before I started, I used to get 9 spins on the prop for every 1 revolution on the pedals, and now I'm getting 22. So it's a lot nicer to pedal, and hopefully it'll be just that little bit faster. I'm going to have to wait till weekend before I can take my boat back out and do some good filming. But in the meantime, I'm going to show you a couple of clips from last time I was out. Don't miss it guys, subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, catch you next time.